All right, well, I have 7:01. Wait a minute. Let me hit record.
Prepared, and we would then, once we select an OPM, we would go to the first ranked OPM and then attempt to we get a fee proposal from them. We would then compare that to the services and compare that with the kind of experience we have on about where the fee should fit in, given typical practices on this type of a project. So the selection of the OPM is probably a month off. The selection of KBA, we have we're in the final stages of doing the boilerplate of the contract, but there are no problems with that. We know what the price is going to be. We know what the schedule is going to be, but we can't enter into a contract because we don't have the money to fund it. So we basically have an agreement in principle subject to favorable action at town meeting. So if I can now bring it up to where we are today at this meeting, we're looking for money to fund the OPM and the KBA, the designer, through the completion of design development documents. So we're not doing construction documents yet. It's design development documents. Usually the amount of compensation that a designer gets based on their overall design fee is about 40% of the design fee for design to bring a project through design development documents. Now, in order to figure out how much money we would like the town in total to be able to fund at this stage is we're looking at the designer's fee would be approximately $1,254,000. The OPM's fee would be about $400,000. And we also would think it would be very prudent to include about $172,000 in really design allowances for items that are not within the designer's usual basic services. And the basic services are all defined in the contract with the designer. There are provisions where a designer has to do or oversee or hire a consultant in a very specialized area of the design that the designer will then rely upon to do their design. The designer can hire a specialized consultant as part of the contract, but they're also entitled to additional services if they do that. So in the case of the $172,000 that we believe should be funded in this portion of the work, because these are services that should be performed early on in the design. So we really have to fund them during the design development just to keep the sequence of information and the design information pulled together in a coherent manner. And though that $172,000 is based upon two different types of specialized services. One where, and this is just an estimate now, but we don't believe it would cost more than this, but we're asking for 100,000 of the 172,000 is to do all the engineering and the design of the traffic control system for the light that will have to be put on Route 3A. In order to allow the fire trucks to go in and out, we're going to have to put a specialized emergency light, a stoplight, and it has to be synchronized with all the other lights, and there have to be traffic studies and the information that all the information has to be put together by technical traffic specialists and light specialists, and we have to give that event. We'll work with the state because it's a state highway, Route 3A, and the state people have their own process. It takes a while to review all the information and ultimately give us the approval and a permit to put in a traffic light on Route 3A. So That information takes a long time, particularly in the state system. It takes a long time to get that done. So it would, because it's such an essential element of the overall project, that work, I'm advised by everybody who's looked at this, including JR and KBA, they said the sooner you can get that work going, the better. And you should be able to get it done through the design development stage. The other piece is a $72,000 allowance for additional services that are related to kind of confirming and designing the communication systems that will be necessary, including possible infrastructure changes to those systems in order to accommodate the specialized electronic needs and communication systems that both the fire department and the police department are going to require on this site. So again, we'd be hiring, well, first of all, the fire department and the police department would work closely with an expert on the different communication systems that will ultimately be built into the project. But because it takes a while to design those systems, we really need the input of a specialty designer now who would work under the aegis of Kessel Booz. But we'd be dealing with them, and the police and fire department would be dealing with them directly, just to make sure that the new systems that will be involved in the project will be compatible with the infrastructure that's currently out there. Or if that's not compatible, then we'd have to figure out how to upgrade the infrastructure to make sure it'll all work. So the total amount that we believe we need to bring this project through the design development documents would be $1,826,000. And if you have any engineering type questions, you might want to ask JR to chime in on that, because a lot of the information I gave you is brought to me by JR, particularly on the two allowance items that I just talked about.
Nancy, maybe I can ask the question that's on everybody's mind. You've identified a $1,250,000 funding source, and I'm hearing an ask for 1.8 million.
Yes.
What am I missing?
You're missing that when Bob Hardy and I spoke this afternoon, we had not, we weren't firm on any numbers, and I didn't know it was that high. So we've got to come up with $600,000. So I need to, if the chair will allow it, I need to go back and figure that out.
Well, we were not going to vote this tonight. And as I understand it, the Board of Selectmen has not voted it tonight. But because it's such an important project, we thought it was important to start the discussion and to potentially streamline our future hearings. And I guess the question I have, is there a way to, partly do this phase so that it's coming in at or under $1,250,000?
I've only seen the preliminary documents that came in last week, and they were closer to the 1.2. So I think I need to go back and talk to Bob and Tom Mayo and figure how we can, phase this differently so that we can get to that 1.25 number.
And
if people agree that that's the right thing to do.
For everyone's benefit, one of the benefits of using the restricted fund balance is that it doesn't involve borrowing, so that there would only be a majority vote on the use of those funds. If this goes back to being a borrowing article, then we need a 2/3 vote for it to go forward. And I'd be happy to have other members of the advisory committee ask any questions that they have at this point, as it may be, they may be helpful to Nancy and to Bob and JR in their future discussions and work on this, which has been extensive already. Libby.
I had a quick question, and I don't know, Bob, if you were involved in the project for Central Fire Station, but that one, I'm wondering if that project had an OPM, because there definitely, as Dave, Lean, and I have heard on Capital Outlay, some different issues with the station of things they need to improve, and the station's really not that old, and they can't find documents or that on some of the HVAC system, and it looks like it's a hybrid between a couple of different designs. And so I know when this article first came up last year, that was one of my things that I think it's great we're using an OPM and that it looks like they're really experienced. I wonder if we did that when we built Central. Does anybody know?
I was not involved with Central. The law requiring an OPM went into effect perhaps 10 to 15 years ago. I can't remember off the top of my head. So it could be that the town, for whatever reason, just didn't want to hire an OPM, or they might have relied upon someone, at the DPW office to act as the OPM, which that's okay too. You can do that as long as an individual has the credentials that are required in the law to be an OPM. So it spells out what their qualifications have to be. It's a big plus if they're an architect or an engineer, but it can be an individual. And a lot of town projects all around the lawn, not just Hingham, were done kind of really without a person specialized in OPM. On our project, it's a very complicated and large price project, and there's nobody on the town payroll that could handle something like this by themselves, because they have to do cost estimates and all sorts of requirements in order to get it to the office. So I can't really comment on Central. Not sure how long ago it was built.
Yeah, I was just curious.
I do know, Libby, that I'm like Bob, I can't comment on that specific project, but I do know in other projects in town, previous town engineers have served in that capacity. But I this is just my opinion on this, but I think it's good governance that we are hiring a third party.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I guess, so I would just ask, as far as that role of the OPM, would that be something where if there was an issue or question on some kind of technical system, whether it's HVAC or the design of it, we'd be able to go back to them if we found out that there was something done wrong that was going to have to be replaced? So is there some, I don't want to say liability, but do they have some responsibility for the systems that they're okaying?
Well, yeah, but the better target, if you will, would be the designer themselves, the engineer or architect who designed the system. If the OPM missed something and they should have caught something, then I guess I'd call it potential secondary liability. But
Okay.
the OPM, under our contract at least, they will be responsible for doing, all the type of oversight that you're referring to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Tina, I saw your hand up. I know you had prior fire station experience.
In
Have you
fact,
got
I
the
do.
answer?
Roger Fernandez for the answer. We use Roger Fernandez as the OPM for that project.
For Central?
Yep.
Central Fire Station or
The Central Fire Station building project.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought they were talking about the town, Central Junior High School. I went too far back in time.
I thought they were talking about the central fire station too. But
That's,
We were-
Tina, that's what you
I
were
think we
referring
were
to, right?
talking-
Central Fire Station?
Fire station,
Right.
yes.
Right, on all the school projects, they all have OPMs. They have to have OPMs if it's over $1.5 million. And they all have very competent companies that provide those services.
And Libby, to partially respond to your question, most of these major construction contracts have various forms of indemnity, insurance, and sometimes bonding requirements that are standard that would try to address any risks presented by the project.
That's great. I just wanted to make sure whatever we did for Central, we don't do for this. And I'm glad.
And are there other members of the AdCom that have questions for tonight? We will have future opportunities to review this article, especially once the selectmen have looked at it and the pencils have been sharpened on the numbers. I'm not seeing any virtual or Julie.
Julie raised her hand.
Julie, do you have a question? I'm trying to
All
glance.
right, I wasn't quick enough on trying to find the raise hand function. Just a quick question about getting back to, I know we're going to talk again and the numbers are going to be looked at again, but I'm just wondering if there is a way to get started on the design part with the $1.2 million and then,
That's
sorry.
what we're gonna go back and try to figure out.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, virtual hands or actual hands? Victor?
So what are other possible uses of the 1.2 of the Hersey House restricted fund balance if for whatever reason it was decided not to use it here? What are we giving up by devoting it here?
You want me to take a stab at that, Nancy?
Sure.
As I understand it, Victor, John Coughlin has indicated that provided that there's a town meeting authorization for the use of the funds, that their uses could be fairly broad in scope and might encompass almost anything that the town could issue bonds for. I think kind of the beauty of using these funds for a project that addresses police and seniors is the proposed use is kind of close to at least part of what the original use was proposed to be. But I think ultimately that's a question for John Coughlin. But I do think there are other things that the funds could be used for.
And I did meet with John Coughlin and he did agree that this was an appropriate use of the funds based on the original town meeting intent.
I think we also, as an advisory committee, identified the benefit of taking these funds that have basically been sitting there for more than 10 years and putting them to use. So other questions, virtual hands or actual hands? I'm not seeing any at this point, so I'd like to thank Nancy and Bob Garrity and JR for all their hard work on this and for a good initial presentation. We'll look forward to seeing you again. Enjoy Florida, Bob.
No,
Thank you very much.
And I think that brings us to
Wow.
Article.
Bye, JR.
Bye.
I think that brings us to Article R concerning the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust reporting requirements. Kristen, are you going to be presenting this or Dave Aline?
I'm going to take this one.
Okay, and I see that Tim White is here. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you,
Yes.
Bob.
Thank you. Tim is, if you don't know, is the chair of the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust. So this, I think, is a fairly simple article. It is to amend Article 39 of the Hingham General Bylaws to change the reporting requirement from annual town meeting to the Board of Selectmen. There's a lot of detail in the comments, so I won't go over all of it. But initially, there was no specific financial reporting requirement in 2007 when the Affordable Housing Trust was created. There was a requirement to have an allocation of how you would spend money, and that was to be reported. And that was cumbersome and not particularly working well, I guess is the way to put it. In 2012, town meeting amended the requirement, as I have put into the comment, to require a reporting mechanism of financial details to annual town meeting, and to require some other things, some interaction with the town accountant. The trust meets regularly, once a year at least, with the Board of Selectmen and with us, with AdCom, on what it's doing. In addition, not a requirement, but because the funding is via, often some of the funding for the Affordable Housing Trust comes from CPC. CPC does its own analysis and it's sort of investigation, I guess, of the funds that the trust has. So at any rate, the as the Board of Selectmen said the other night in their meeting and unanimously supporting this change, there isn't another town committee that has the same kind of financial reporting obligation. And town meeting isn't really the appropriate, in some ways, the appropriate place in the context of, it doesn't really fit in with what happens. The financial reporting and the financial undertakings of the trust have become very complicated over the years because there's money from different sources. There's lots of different projects going on. There's also the Lincoln School Apartments, so there's just a lot that goes on, and it makes a lot more sense for that reporting requirement to be to the Board of Selectmen. It doesn't change really the transparency of what happens. The trust, just like other town committees, will still have a report in the annual town report. And of course, all of their financial doings are open to public inspection at any rate. The other thing, this is a very hard job for the treasurer of the committee. And so there is now going to be more town support for managing sort of the reporting requirements of, or the reporting of the financial obligations of the trust. Having said, and Kristen's probably experienced the same thing, the attempt to try to figure out various pots of money, and then Lincoln School gets thrown in there as well. It's a very complicated for someone who's a volunteer to be doing this. And Anita Comerford has done an incredible job, but there is now someone in Emily Wentworth's office who will be sort of taking over this role, not as treasurer, but will be doing the actual financial details. I don't know if I've left anything else. As I said, the Board of Selectmen endorsed this but unanimously the other night. Tim, if there's anything you'd like to add?
I guess the only thing I would say is that it makes all the sense in the world, and why we didn't initially have it as the Board of Selectmen, reporting to the Board of Selectmen, I just don't recall. But the trusts are a fairly new entity in town government, and we're still learning as we go along.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Tim. Any questions from members of the advisory committee? I'm not seeing, Victor, go ahead.
So currently, I mean, I didn't pull out one of the annual reports, but so currently there's a financial statement or analysis published in the annual report for the trust?
That's separate, Victor. The annual report that we file every year reports on the activities of the trust over the course of the year. Technically, we're supposed to also give a financial report, which would, halfway through town meeting, stand up and say, okay, we've taken this amount of money in, we've spent this amount of money out. And it just makes more sense to do that before the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, so that, in other words, that's something that's not been done, right?
It's not happening, right?
Right, okay. All right, so this proposal then is moving, it's not just moving an existing report from the town meeting written annual report to the selectmen. It's actually it's taking the step where you're making a report to the selectmen that should have been made each year to the town meeting, but it just makes more sense to go to the selectmen.
Yeah, and having the benefit of Mike Silveri, who is the new staff person in Emily Wentworth's office, is going to make all the difference in the world. You know, the volunteer positions that, you know, especially Anita Comerford as the treasurer, and before her it was Susan, I remember her last name now, but the amount of work you have to put in just to get your monthly reports in that we review at every one of our meetings, which obviously are public meetings as well, it's just too much. And I think having this as a fresh start with Mike Silveri is going to make all the difference in the world.
Thank you.
There is a very brief report that appears in the Hingham Town Report, but it's really not a financial report.
Right.
But Anita, back when I was liaison to the Housing Trust, Anita Comerford was doing great monthly financial reports that were to the penny correct and detailed.
Yeah. And it's become even more complicated because it takes so long to develop some of these projects into affordable units. So for example, right now, one of the houses is being rented because it makes more sense to have it. But then you have a whole nother series of financial reporting in terms of rent and utilities and insurance and all those kinds of things. So it's a very complicated set of financial reports.
Alan, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Just wondering if this impacts Article C at all. Would this still be a report to town meeting as well?
Yes, so the trust will continue to make the report like all committees. So it stays in Article C, yeah.
Right.
In fact, I think Tim's been given a deadline of when he needs to get that report in or something. I think I heard that the other night.
Good question, though. Any other questions from members of the advisory committee? Virtual or actual hands? I don't see any, so unless anybody sees a reason not to vote this tonight, where the selectmen have already voted it, I think we can go ahead and vote.
Okay, so I recommend that the town vote to amend the Affordable Housing Authority bylaw of the town adopted March 13th, 1939 is heretofore amended by amending Article 39, Section 2A16 by replacing the reference to annual town meeting with the Board of Selectmen.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Well, we come to vote then. Alan,
Aye.
Daveline,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Nancy, you're on mute.
Sorry, aye.
Thank you. Libby,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
and Julie.
Aye.
Thanks, Daveline. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim, for being here tonight.
14-0. In accordance with our revised agenda, we're going to defer any hearing or vote on Article AA tonight. There has been an issue that arose concerning a neighbor claiming certain rights that has posed further investigation, shall we say. Anything to add to that, Kristen?
No, just waiting back to hear from Emily once they research that a little bit further. Emily wasn't aware of it, and so they were waiting for
Okay.
documentation from the neighbor.
And per our revised agenda, we're also deferring a hearing on Article BB, the citizens petition to amend the general bylaws concerning volunteers. The selectmen are hearing that tonight. Whether they will vote it or not, I don't know. I have designated myself as the liaison, and I've been in touch with Mr. Patch, so we may get to this next week, but we'll see how things develop. And the last of the warrant article considerations we have for tonight was the review of the revised comment on the Waterways Fund transfer. We already voted this, but folks wanted to see the revised comment that was distributed before Tuesday's meeting, but a little bit last minute. I don't know whether anybody has any further suggestions concerning the comment.
Bob,
Ellen,
if I can just clarify, it wasn't the comment that people had, I guess, questions on, it was the recommendation. So,
Oh, you're right. I may be thinking
Yeah.
about the, you're right. I'm
Just-
thinking about the Route 3A article.
Yeah.
Sorry.
that's okay. I just wanted to clarify. And so
Okay.
just for everyone's benefit, I did add though in the comment, second paragraph, first line, I did add non-statutory to that first line. And then this recommendation has been blessed by Bob, our chair, attorney extraordinaire. So hopefully all the other attorneys will agree with it. So I think, does everybody have a copy of it, or do you want me to read it to just see if you're all okay with the revised recommendation?
I'm not sure if I'm looking at the new one or the old one, so maybe if you read the recommendation.
Sure. This new one, I can look and see when I sent it, but so the new recommended motion is that the town vote to transfer from available funds all fees paid to the town of Hingham through June 30th, 2021 from any parking license for the purpose of accessing slips or moorings, all revenues generated by the harbor master's office, including mooring, docking permit late fees and boating fines, and 50% of boat excise taxes, estimated to be approximately $85,000 in fiscal 2021 for deposit to the town's municipal waterways improvement and maintenance fund to be used in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 5G.
So I think both you and I, Victor, had indicated that rather than putting in a transfer of an estimated amount, that we wanted something more definite. So this basically says that all fees from those sources, or 50% of the fees, but all of them are going to be transferred. And we've still included the estimate. So I think that addresses the issue that we raised.
And this is in keeping really with the article from the 2019 annual town meeting. Although that was a broader recommendation because that was the first year we established the fund. So there were some of the statutory amounts were going in there too. But
Andy, you've got a question?
I would suggest that instead of the numeral 6/30/21, you write out June 30, 2021. And would removal of the comma after boating fines make it more clear that the 85,000 estimate is for all of the funds mentioned, late fees and boating fines and 50% of the excise tax?
sure, I like the comma change. As far as the June 30, 21, that's how we've done it in the past. So if we were to change that, it would be, different than the previous warrant articles, but I would.
No, then leave it as is. I didn't realize that.
Well, that'll also be reviewed by our editors extraordinaire.
Yes.
And remember, Andy, we do use the Oxford comma here.
Well, the Oxford comma is confusing
I'm just,
here.
I'll let the editors hash that out.
You see my,
You're on mute.
thank God.
I
I
see
see
what?
your point. I just disagree with it, I guess. So I didn't find it more confused or find it confusing.
So,
It doesn't meet the criteria of your editors.
well, I took it out, Nancy, so if you want to put it back in, you can.
Other questions or comments from members of the AdCom?
Julie,
Julie?
I can't use the raise hand function right now, so because I'm a co-host, so I just want to tell you that. But anyway, so we did not vote this already before, right?
That's right. We did not vote this.
Okay.
I was confused.
Okay,
I
I
was-
just want to make
I was
sure,
thinking-
I checked
I
the
was
law.
thinking of the Route 3A article.
Okay, thanks.
But if there are no further comments tonight, we can,
oh, is Sue raising her hand?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. If you're putting the other 35,000 of boat excise tax in the new waterways, we have that as local receipts.
You know, that was a question that I had as to whether this should say transfer from local receipts, because the parking go into fund balance or into local receipts also? And the fines, aren't they all in local receipts, Sue?
No, actually, the only thing that is, if we started putting everything from the harbor into the waterways. But 35, half the boat excise tax goes to the waterways, half of it stays in the general fund. So if you're gonna now vote 35,000 to go to the waterways, you're also creating another $35,000 in the deficit.
Right, these are the non-statutory amounts though, Sue, so I'm also, my question there is on the 40,000 of parking that's in this article and the fines, are they also in that respective line item on local receipts?
I have to look at the 40,000 because that was a lease that was up. So I'm
Yep.
not sure if it was ever renewed.
Yeah,
so
so,
are you saying, Sue, that we should say from available funds and local receipts, or should we break it down?
No, it's all local receipts. All I'm saying is you're creating a hole in local receipts. Because we're gonna have to now take that 35,000 out of local receipts. So
and if the parking, the 40K of parking and the fines is also in local receipts, then it's all the 85, which we discussed at the last meeting, but I presume since this article got put forth this year and it was inserted by the selectmen, they did not last year, they did not have this article. So we created the fund in 2019, and I believe at that point they did put this, not obviously they had to put the statutory amounts, but I think they also put the non-statutory. Then last year's town meeting, they had no warrant article for the non-statutory, and now we have this. So I presumed from the fact that the selectmen proposed this warrant article that they realized that potentially, if all 85 of this is in local receipts, then that's going to be an issue for the budget. So I think
Okay.
that's something that, you know, is kind of beyond, I think that's something for the selectmen because they put this article forth.
okay, doke.
Well, where this is the first year after the initial year to do this,
Yes.
we ought to make sure we get it right because it's going to be repeated in years to come.
In May, they didn't do this last year. So
Well,
I
thought
don't,
I thought the whole concept was we were supposed to do it every year, so we had the dredging fund at the end of 10 years.
ideally, but last year the selectmen's decision was that that the non-statutory amounts that they wanted to use them to balance the budget, and they did not put that in the waterways fund last year.
Oh, so is this going to become a perennial?
I said, when I did the warrant articles in 2019, I said to, I brought it up at that point to the chair of AdCom and to Ken, and I said, this really should be a perennial article if our mission here is to have all harbor related revenues be put in that new waterways fund, because we know that dredging isn't getting any cheaper. But when I asked Ken last year, actually, I'm trying to think if the article got pulled early in the game.
Got pulled. I think it was, we thought about it, the town thought about it and pulled it.
And pulled it.
I think so.
Yep.
Okay.
So there's no question, Sue, that that this has an impact on, the forecast. And I believe when I looked at the local receipts, it looked to me like possibly all 85 are in local receipts, but that's really a question for you because I'm not totally sure where the parking went. But this is all the non-statutory amounts. So,
Okay,
This one of our usual problems in a lot of structural things. We came up in 2019, as you say, Libby, with this idea of, we have to put money aside so that we don't have this large dredging expense in 10 years or whatever it is.
Yep.
And then last year, the practical budget problems of dealing with the operating budget. So we can't do this.
right.
So I guess the question is, Bob makes a good point. Do the selectmen really mean this?
Exactly. So I think that this is above our pay grade. So I think this, that's something Bob will have to take up with probably.
It's not just above, it's not just the selectmen. We could decide that we'd rather have this for operating costs too.
True. But I'm saying whether they pull it since they're the proponents. So why do these harbor articles always turn into be so much more complicated than they should be?
It does seem to me that we ought to get the language in the recommended motion right. And that's going to require a discussion, maybe Libby, you, me, Sue, and Tom and Michelle. And Tom and Michelle are hopefully arriving later on once the selectmen's meeting, once they're no longer needed at the selectmen's meeting, so that Tom can provide an overview of his budget recommendations. So we might actually have a chance to ask him that tonight.
Okay, good.
So why don't we defer voting on this, at least for the time being, until we can shine some.
I thought
more
we already
light.
voted on it, Bob, and it was
No,
just a
we,
matter.
no, I think
Okay.
you're right. We did not vote it until
Okay.
we saw the actual language. Although we've got George's minutes.
That's okay. Daveline's saying no too, so I'm.
Okay, all right. Okay. The next thing I put on the, I don't know, is there any further discussion on that? On the waterways? Andy, is your hand up? No? Oh, okay.
No.
It's down now. All right. No other virtual or actual hands? Okay, the next thing I put on the agenda was a discussion of forecast financial policy, fund balance and override, finance and tax planning tools, because I didn't know whether folks, having had the opportunity to use those tools, wanted to engage in further discussion of the wonderful presentations we've seen and discussions we've had over the course of our last two meetings. So does anybody want to weigh in tonight on any of those subjects? Looking for any actual or virtual hands? I don't see any, so I think we will, we have approval of minutes. Oh, Tina.
I don't know if this is a good question, but I've been wondering about, I like Dave's presentation the other night. The tool was great, and looking at the numbers that way was helpful. But I was thinking back about some of the bigger projects in the town, and I wondered, who is the actual advocate for an override? Like, who does the groundwork in the town? And I know there's been a lot of Facebook work, but I remember with the schools, the two schools and the fire station, that there were groups that were kind of going out with dog and pony shows and really talking to people about, why it was a good idea and what it did. And I wondered, with an override, who does that work?
Well, the Board of Selectmen determine whether it goes on the ballot or not. So it's ultimately the Board of Selectmen. They're going to decide what goes on the ballot. And what is likely to go on the ballot is what would have to be voted on by a town meeting, regular or special. And so I think ultimately it's the Board of Selectmen. And you may want to go back, there was that very helpful DOR publication that was distributed to everybody on overrides, which kind of goes through the process from A to Z. And it talks about things like tiered overrides or, a general override as to one number or not. That really has, I think, the best answers about an override. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that? Dave?
Well, us and Tina, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think I heard Tina's question about too was something I've been wondering about, which is that, maybe an override happens when people hear about it the first time on the floor of town meeting and think that's no big deal. Maybe it's going to take a lot of energy, and Alan can speak to the override around East and so forth. And I think Tina's question is a really good one, which is that I think there is certainly a portion of the town that is familiar with this conversation as it relates to the schools. And there's been energy on Zoom meetings and so forth. But, that strikes me as potentially a long way from a town meeting affirmative vote and then a ballot affirmative vote. And so I guess, Tina, I'm not sure I've lived in Hingham through an override. Maybe the first one was when I first got here, but I think you raise a really good point. And I think if I was in a position to really be depending on an override for the success of whatever I was advocating for, I think I would be working hard to energize my supporters around that. And I think it would be important also to energize them around what it is going to be. And I guess I think that, the 15 of us, the 16 of us have spent some time with that tool, a little bit of time. When I look at it, it's just kind of depressing. But it's important, and it kind of speaks to the question that we are going to have right before us shortly. And so I guess I may have twisted your question into something that it wasn't intended to be, but I share what I took as a general question about, where is the advocacy on behalf of this? And I guess I would say that's a very good question. And I would also say, and what is the advocacy for? Because there is such a blank, at least even in my mind, as to back to Evan's good question from a couple of weeks ago, or it feels like a couple of weeks ago, it was probably Tuesday, was, what are we solving for? What is the objective here? Are we trying to fund 22? Are we trying to fix something between now and 26? Are we trying to do 22 and then some and talk about it in a year? I think those are all really good questions, and I think they're tricky ones. And I think for better or for worse, it's going to come back to us to kind of sift through all that.
And Bob, is the threshold for an override 2/3?
No, it's a 50%
at town meeting?
majority.
I know it's majority at the polls, but is it still only majority at town meeting?
I think it's majority at town meeting.
Okay.
And Evan had his hand up. So why don't you go ahead, Evan?
Yeah, and I thank you, Tina, for the question, because I've been thinking about that. It feels like with the gap that we have to solve for, and at least some admission that there needs to be an override evaluated, it kind of feels like we're navel gazing a little bit on how this actually gets done. And while Mary does a great job of taking us all through it, but she's done, as of the next election cycle. And I guess if I look, the other two selectmen would need to, I need to understand kind of where they would sit or how they would approach this. Which leads me to the question is, how do we vote a budget if there's a potential override hanging out there?
The way it appeared in 2009 in the warrant, there was basically a budget within the available revenues. And at the end of Article 6, it stated that in the event of the approval of an override, that X dollars would be added to, I think, certain municipal departments, and that X dollars would be added to the schools. So I think that's what ultimately would be in Article 6. And we would have a more expanded comment from advisory on Article 6 this year in the event of an override, because we would have to explain the override process. And I've asked Julie to tackle that. I see your hand, Julie, and Andy's had his hand up for a while. So let me go to him first, and I'll come back to you.
I defer to Julie first, and then I'll speak.
Okay, go ahead, Julie.
Well, it's interesting because the last time we had the override was the $1.1 million when we were opening East School. And I've looked at the comment from that year and in Article 6. And there is a section at the end of Article 6, and there's a little bit of language saying that if there was a yes vote at the polls, then they would add the $1.1 million. But the comment doesn't talk about it at all. It's, I looked at it, Article 6, maybe it's somewhere just in the report of the advisory committee that year, but just to let you know, I have looked at it and there's no extra language about it.
That was that advisory committee. This is this advisory committee.
Okay, I'm not trying to get out of it, but I'm just saying, I just thought it was interesting that it just was like regular and then sort of tacked on at the end. So whatever, what it's worth.
I think we owe it to the citizens to, that if this is where we're going, to provide them some information about the process. Andy, are you ready?
Yeah, my question, and I guess maybe it's for Dave, but for everybody, looking at the numbers as Dave presented, it seems to me inconceivable that there could not be an override. And I wonder if anybody disagrees with that. And number two, it also seems to me that the proposed budget is excessive, even with an override, because of the impact on following years. So that to me, it seems that we or somebody has to reduce the budget on the one hand, and two, determine the amount of the override on the other. Or am I missing something?
Well, I will say one thing, as recent discussions with Sue have indicated, we do have to produce a balanced budget. And I know that some people in playing with the tool were thinking about an override that was for more money than we needed. That is not a tactic that we can use. We basically have to end up with zero. We can't propose future taxes for future years that really aren't before us. So,
Wait, what? Can you say that again, Bob?
yeah, basically, at the end of the day, maybe to use Evan's phrase, what we're solving for is zero. We are going to match revenues.
Zero in 22?
A balanced budget in 22. so that the sources and the uses, when they're subtracted from one another, equal zero.
But it doesn't an override by definition consider future years? Operational override?
Well, no, well, we are talking about a future year. We're talking about FY '22.
No, I think you're misunderstanding my question, which is that an override by definition impacts revenue beyond 22.
It does, it's a permanent tax increase, no question about it. But an override is one way for fiscal year '22 that revenues can be generated to come to a zero budget for FY '22. Now, as in past years, when ACES has said to the school committee, this is all we have and you can't get everything that you want, ACES or the advisory committee could say something to that effect this year, and we could balance the budget within revenues without an override. I personally don't think that's going to happen, but it seems like people, do want to fund the schools.
Well, sorry to belabor it. I'm still kind of trying to get an understanding of the question you said, where the goal is zero in 22. So let's just imagine for a moment that we have a $4 million deficit in 22, and we don't propose to use any fund balance, but we want to do a $4 million override in 22. So we would have a zero.
Right.
You're saying that would be permissible, as would be 2 million of fund balance and a 2 million override.
Yeah.
So we just can't show, I mean, I
You
understand.
you can't ask for like a $10 million override.
Not agreeing that an extra 2 billion of fund balance would be.
No, I understand. I know, I'm just but so that's, okay. I'm going to have to process this one a little bit, because it strikes me as a kind of a remarkable statement, though, because if I'm not trying to blame the school department, but if we're incurring expenses, as George well pointed out in the model, where by definition we're with eyes open, we're going into a situation where we have a mismatch between expense growth and revenue growth. We're suggesting that we can't try to mitigate that revenue growth over the next over subsequent year, that expense growth over subsequent years with an override this year. You almost force an annual or whatever override process in the future to solve those problems.
Isn't the idea one town meeting can't bind another? So this town meeting has to vote on 2022, and we can't bind 2023's town meeting, or I guess 2022's town meeting.
We were just bound by 1997.
Next year's town
Wait,
meeting can do an
can we
override.
just-
We're not binding them.
We just have one person at a time, please.
No.
Well, let me ask you this, Bob. Is there an explanation? I mean, I'm not quarreling with your statement. I'm just wondering, is there a document that speaks to kind of the restriction on the override that you're talking about in terms of its consequences for, I guess, the current year?
I think it's probably the general laws of Massachusetts in terms of how municipal finance is to be conducted. I mean, Sue, you may be able to speak to this as well as anybody.
Well, all I can say is you have to go to town meeting with a balanced budget. So if the reason why we're doing an override is because we have too much in expenses and not enough revenue. You can't ask somebody to raise their taxes to produce a $2 million surplus so you can use it in future years because the expenses are growing. And that's why, Mary's model, when she said this, if you have an override, you're going to continually have overrides every few years. that is the reason, because you have to have a balanced budget.
All right, so last question, I promise. So what you're saying then is that is it a fair statement then that the maximum amount of an override in any 1 year is, at this stage in the game, assuming no other adjustments to the budget, the maximum amount of an override in 1 year, assuming no fund balance usage, is going to be the deficit prior to the override?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm done.
Okay, I got 5 people with hands up. Let me call on some people that haven't had a chance to speak yet. Daveline?
So I just had a question. If I listened to that MMA discussion this afternoon about the federal money, and there were some interesting things in that. And the one I took away was that in President Biden's executive order on January 21st, the money that comes from FEMA, that's always we get 75% back, but we have to pay the 25%. That 25% now is coming, it's 100%. And so it seems to me like there's a lot, as they were talking about, it seemed to me like there was a lot of money that's coming to the Commonwealth, and money for schools and things like that, so I hope that somebody is and somebody in the school department, because I'm cognizant of Andy's comment a few weeks ago about maybe there are things you do as contract employees and different kinds of ways to utilize that money, which seems like it's not just money for this year and next year, but it sounds like there's some pretty significant money there. And so I just hope whosever job it is, besides, it's not my job to understand everything they said, but it was pretty amazing. At least I walked away with thinking there's some real money here that could be helping us.
Well, there were what, 12 Hingham people on that call. So we all have our hands in it, Dave.
Okay.
And we're just waiting to find out what Hingham is getting.
Okay. Good.
I understand there is a substantial FEMA reimbursement that is making its way to Hingham.
Right. But I think before it was thinking that was.
But there also
was 25% we were responsible for, and if we're not, that adds up.
They're also slow.
Huge. It's huge. I mean, I will tell you, we have gotten FEMA money from Sandy, which was what, 2015?
11.
And we received it in like 2019. I mean, some of them are very, very, very slow paying. But yes, the fire and public safety is basically the FEMA grants.
Right. But then also a lot of the COVID relief and specifically the money for schools and things. So it just seems like there's a pot of money there that we maybe should be digging into a little.
But we've already spent all that money. The COVID is reimbursed.
Right.
Let's get through some of the other observations first, and then maybe we can come back to that. Tina?
I have just two quick ones. Because we have to vote an override both at town meeting and at the ballot, and it's not a guaranteed win, do we have to present the budget both ways? Do we have to present what it looks like without an override and then what it looks like with it?
That's my general understanding, yes.
Okay. And then my second one, just quickly going back to my advocacy, it stands out to me that, Nancy's original comment, not to call you out, Nancy, for the public safety facility, it came off as too much advocacy from the advisory committee, and people were uncomfortable with that. So we are not advocates for an override. And then the selectmen, they weren't advocates for a public, they spoke about the logic of it. So I've just wondered, is it the school committee's and the administration's job to sort of sell this idea? Because again, the presentation was great, but it is kind of a large thing for people to bite off without having knowledge and being on board with it, understanding what it is and how it affects them. And we have till the end of March to make a decision.
Well, the public safety facility has already been the subject of 2 prior town meetings.
Right, I just was using that as an example.
And I mean, we ultimately are keeping open minds until we vote something. We're listening to all sides, but then we're making a recommendation. And it's our role generally to support that recommendation. Or if there is a minority viewpoint, the minority gets to do their viewpoint. And generally, the minority and the majority's viewpoints are reflected cooperatively in the comment.
Okay.
Alan?
I guess my brain is still stuck on the first part of Tina's question and what Dave was getting at in terms of going into town meeting. Can we not? I mean, it would sort of seem like we can't propose a budget that presumes passing an override, right? I mean, and I'm thinking back to the e-school thing. We had a town budget, and the override was, there were the 2 separate overrides. One was they were separate from kind of the operating budget of that year, because it was a debt exclusion for building the school, and then there was the operating override to say, if we build the school, we have to staff it. And we said they were actively advocated together, like don't vote for one and not the other, because you can't do it. Separate from the operating budget, but this can't be separate from the operating budget because it is the operating budget. So I guess I don't know if that's a question. I'm stuck on how we go to town meeting with
I think there is work being done at the selectmen and town finance team level as to, ultimately the selectmen are going to have to vote a budget, and they are confronted with the same issue. So I think there is more to come.
Okay. My brain will stay stuck on.
Andy and Evan have had their hands up, Victor, and I'll get back to you.
Go ahead, Andy. Oh, he put it. You're on mute, Andy.
I'm sorry, I lowered my hand.
Oh, okay. Evan.
I'll actually let Victor go.
So I just want to sort of respond to a couple of things. I think in terms of the operating budget or the budget, and Bob's right. I mean, there's a variety of ways it could be presented, but if the budget that passes at town meeting includes the override, and then that fails at the vote, then the town has to have another town meeting and approve a different budget. So that would be one reason you'd have sort of the alternative budget, like apparently we did in 2009, so that if you do fail at the override vote, you have already approved something, at your regular town meeting. You don't have to meet again. I guess one question I have is, if we go in with the lower budget, the alternative budget, it's possible that people would say, some people from the floor would say, well, assuming the override fails, we don't like the allocation of money in the base budget, I'll call it, and we, argue, I don't know, pay another $1 million to the schools and take it from somewhere else or whatever. So I don't know how you really prepare for that contingency, but that's certainly a possibility. The other point I think I wanted to say on this advocacy piece, I'm not sure what the parameters are, but I think there are restrictions on what at least the Board of Selectmen and perhaps all town bodies can do in terms of actually advocating the specifics of an override. And I'm hazy on what the details are, but I don't think you can go ahead and, at least the selectmen can go ahead and urge passage for a particular item. It doesn't sound quite right, but I think there is some sort of restriction to that along those lines, so that the advocacy, I think, in this case, if it were primarily for schools, I think that there'd be school groups that would want to get going on the public PR and making sure that the community knows the reasons for the override and why it's critical. And same for any other aspects of the override.
Maybe you
no
could-
questions, just some thoughts.
Well, maybe you could check on any restrictions on advocacy then and get back to us. That would be greatly appreciated. Evan, did you still
Yeah,
want to?
you know, I do. I still do, unfortunately, for all of you. I'm picking up on what Victor said. And to be honest, everybody's made great points. It sounds like we're 14 people all trying to blindly find our way through something that hasn't been done before. And unfortunately, history, to Alan's point, like with East School, it was a separate budget. We're talking about the operating budget. So if we can't advocate, which we don't, the school committee can't advocate and select advocating, I guess, how does this is like inside baseball. We all understand what's going on. The majority of people are watching The Bachelor tonight. So how do we get people to understand exactly to people to understand kind of what's actually going on here? And you couple that with, even if we say we voted a 4.5, whatever the last that we saw was, $4.5 million override. There's a high likelihood, based on the current legislation, Dave Lean alluded to it, that there's multiple years worth of funding coming from the Biden administration for schools and other things. So we may vote this budget and we may get an extra $1.5 million potentially for schools and maybe for police and other things. I don't know. I don't know what's all in that package. So we're trying to zero it out, but because of timing and we only get one chance to do this once a year, there's a whole bunch of things going on that could impact and say we'll actually have a surplus of $3 million next year if we authorize the override based on the timing of payments from the federal government. So I guess how do you plan? We have these real constraints on us, but there's a whole bunch of other things going on kind of outside it. I just don't understand wholly how we effectively plan for that as a town. So it's not really a question. I think it's more of a comment.
I know some other folks have raised their hands, but let me take a stab at two of the major things that I think have come up. One is I do think we're going to have to propose a budget, or the town is going to have to propose a budget, the selectmen will have to, that gets to zero without an override with the anticipated revenues for FY22. So if you think about taking out the 800,000 odd of town administrator recommendations, and you think of taking out the extra $500,000 for capital, and you think about the school budget in terms of the level services budget and the recovery budget, and you put the level services budget into the numbers so that you need to keep subtracting things to the point where you have made up that 4 million or 6.5 million deficit, depending on how fund balance is used. And with respect to the point that, and then the rest gets allocated as the use of the override. And overrides can be tiered, or they can be segregated out as the specific pots of money. But that is something I think the selectmen have to be involved in, that we don't weigh in on. As far as if we get a pot of gold from the federal government, and if we get enhanced FEMA money in the next couple of out years, it's the same as if we had unexpected excess revenues. And at the end of the fiscal year, that revenue surplus would go into fund balance and would then be utilized in accordance with the financial policy to be reviewed. Now, also, if all of a sudden we're running huge surpluses every year, which doesn't seem likely given the forecast, it is possible for a town to vote a so-called underride. But those are all determinations that are going to be made for FY23 or beyond. Our task is to focus on FY22. So I hope that was useful. Brenda, you have a question or comment?
My first comment was, my memory of the override in 2009 was that there were meetings that explained it, not per se advocating it, but explaining it. And I assume that selectmen advisory, if we end up on some level supporting the notion of an override, that we certainly could be involved in explaining it.
Yep.
And the reasons for it. So again, not quite advocacy, but at least getting the information out. I think that seems consistent with our role.
Kind of like the water company transition meetings.
Exactly. Right.
They're public information. What if you do? What if you don't?
Exactly.
Andy? Were you first, Brenda?
I had one other thing.
Okay, good.
If there's
Sorry.
sure to be a surplus, can't the selectmen change the tax rate? Lower the per thousand, X number of dollars per thousand. So again, if there ever were a surplus, isn't that an option?
Well, I don't know. I guess it's the frank answer. I don't know whether we'd have to vote an underride.
Who's saying no?
That would be an underride.
You'd have to vote an underride.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right, Andy, back to you.
My memory of 2009 was the school committee and the school groups were very active in advocating for the override. And it was somewhat easier in that there was a very specific goal, the East School, if you will. But I'm concerned about two things this year. First, even with all of the money the school is talking about, this is the budget for next year. And I have heard nothing about any remedial efforts that are going to be taken this year to help the students recover. Everything that I've heard starts after July, and there's very little consideration being given to summer school, if any. And I mean, nobody's talking about hiring interventionists or extra tutors or any of that stuff if the kids go back on April 1, or even, the lower grades if they're going back on March 15. You have 3 months, April, May, and June, and you have a school system where probably the wiser course would be just simply to have everybody repeat the year. But I mean, I just don't understand what the school department specific plans are, or the school committee and the school department specific plans are for recovery efforts. We have seen and heard about the need for additional personnel, and that certainly should be part of it and all. But how you get a sixth grader who has picked up, let's say, 30% of what would normally be expected to be 75% of a year's work, how you just move that person into the 7th grade and then expect that person to catch up, I don't know. So I guess this is a long way of saying that I guess my view is the school committee and the board of selectmen should be getting together to attack the issue of getting the students recovered, if you'll pardon the word, but, and then maybe even think of coming to us for more funds for this year, and then from fund balance, and then as well, specific plans for next year that can be appreciated and readily understood by the people who are going to have to vote for the override, and not just say, well, you know, the kids are behind and this is, we need all this money for recovery.
I think that is outside the scope of what our responsibilities are.
But well said, Andy.
And no, there's very much wisdom in what you just said. But that's the school committee's job. That's not our job. I saw some other hands and then they disappeared. Alan?
Maybe just quickly clarify, yes, in 2009, it was the school building committee kind of was the lead organization. I mean, I was the chair of that, but, and along with a group of very active parents who happened to be Mary Power and Christine Smith and those folks. And we did do an extensive, I mean, it was a year at least of presentations at the senior center. We did public meetings at the library. Obviously traveled around to the schools. We came to advisory committee a lot. We went to the board of selectmen a lot. With, yeah, in some ways easier to define project, but that combination sort of was the advocacy, was the school building committee. Once we'd reached our decision about here's the plan. And it's, to Brenda's point, it was a little bit of education, but really kind of with advocacy as well.
Okay.
Just sort of clarify.
There was one other thing I wanted to add about what happens at town meeting with the budgets. Assuming we vote a budget that's balanced without an override, and the override amounts are not supported by the town meeting, it would be open to someone at the town meeting to make a motion from the floor to revise the budget amount for one department, but they would then have to fund their revision by taking money from other departments' budgets. Not a, the town meeting would essentially become the advisory committee on the floor. And Victor.
Bob, could they move to take more money from fund balance as opposed to from another budget?
I guess I'd have to think about that one and talk to people about that one. You know, great question.
What does Sue think about that?
That I don't know either. I'm with Bob. I think we'd have to talk about that. It is a funding source.
Well, you've given us some homework, Victor.
Like we don't have enough, Victor.
Anytime.
You know, but I suppose
it's a good question.
I suppose that's a good what if to know the answer to.
Yep.
Nancy?
I just have a question of the mechanics of that, or even the legality of that. If 85% of your budget is people, can they be technically fired on the floor of town meeting? I mean, that would be the only way to reduce those budgets.
Well, if there's no override, there are going to be layoffs. You know, I mean, that's the consequence of a vote. If you don't have the money to pay people, the departments need to balance their departmental budgets. And
I'm just
if-
surprised there's no protection from kind of a cabal, you know, I mean, it feels like a coup to do it on the floor of town meeting.
Protection from a direct democracy? I don't
Well,
know.
Well, I don't, yeah.
You're wading
I
into
I
the
understand what
deep
you're
end of the
saying,
pool.
Evan, but I
Yeah.
don't know that that's.
This is a
what I mean.
highly unusual town meeting procedure. You know, that would have to go through a number of votes to get to the point where it was an affirmative motion. But these are highly unusual times, so it's probably good to give this some thought. But yeah, I mean, that's what's happened in other towns when, you know, they don't have the money to pay the people they have. An override doesn't pass, there has to be layoffs.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So, Alan, you're,
But going into town meeting would pre any town vote. I mean, the only two variables we can really, that we really had to deal with are the expense, the uses, and the amount of fund balance you put towards anything that doesn't have a source for it. Is that not right? And then, or if you presumed hiring, but then it failed in an override, there's probably not enough space in between the two to actually hire. Or I don't know.
well, presumably if there are information sessions about an override, those information sessions are going to tell people that if the override does not pass, that 80% of our budget is people, and they're not going to have, some of them aren't going to have jobs. So,
I think, Bob, I'm not sure that I would agree with that. I think you would probably, with a level funded budget, not have any layoffs. And we could do a level funded budget.
I understand,
But
I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're there at doing a level funded budget without cutting more than that. But people are working on that. But as I understand it, the schools are hiring people now.
Well, that's because they've had all sorts of vacant positions. If you remember the documents they showed us with all the retirements they had and all the people on leaves of absence. They should be hiring.
Well, we may be getting ahead of ourselves. Good to have the discussion. Good to recognize that there may be consequences. I see more hands. Dave.
Just
then
one
Julie.
quick comment, but just again, kind of to put in the pot with Victor's, I think, super prescient question about the desire to grab more fund balance on the floor of town meeting. I will confess, and I certainly take you at your word that it's conceivable that a level services budget in and of itself requires an override. I guess I would just put out there as food for thought that it strikes me just as one individual that a choice of an override to have people keep jobs and a choice of an override to add new positions seems to work in two different parts of my brain somehow. And I would just, again, we're just talking amongst friends. Like, I mean, if that's really the situation, I guess I would, just in the last 30 seconds that I've thought about it, it might make sense to think about two overrides in that case, because I just would hate to put someone's job, in other words, I wouldn't want to link things that I think have a different order of magnitude and consequence on human beings, if that's one way of looking at it. So just a thought.
Well, I think that's one of the determinations that the selectmen are going to have to make. We may certainly be able to weigh in on that as budget considerations go forward. Julie, you had a comment or question?
Well, going along the lines of the floor of town meeting, say there's some kind of motion or vote to try to take money out of another budget to increase the size of I know we're all dealing with hypotheticals here, but increase the size of the school budget. Are there any guardrails, any policies, any kind of thing that would be a huge negative consequence if the pie of what the school budget percentage is increases, dramatically, so that, say the schools went up to 70% of the town's budget or something like that? There.
There's a wall full of general laws out there. And even your esteemed lawyers on the AdCom haven't read a lot of them. And so when you say any or all, it's hard to give an answer. I mean, I don't know, for example, if a town could defund its police department so it had no police, or defund its fire department so it had no fire. Towns can certainly allocate resources so that a town that wants to spend 80% of its funds on education presumably has the right to do that if that's what its citizens vote. Are we ready to move on at this point?
Yes.
Now that we're depressed.
Well, it was a good discussion, and it's worthwhile to have this because we are truly getting to the crunch time. Within 3 weeks, I think there's going to be a lot of important decisions made.
Can I ask one last question, Bob?
Are you sure?
Yeah. So at this point in the year, when we acquired the water company, how many informational sessions would we have run by, say, March 4th?
I don't know. I remember being at 1 or 2 major informational sessions. But I'll simply observe that the water company process, of course, had been going on for 8 years. And, we're faced with a lot of decisions that are triggered by these extraordinary times in this wholly unwanted, unexpected pandemic.
Oh, I get that, but I'm just saying.
I think there were 19 from the 1st of January until the time that AdCom voted on the water company. There were 19 public meetings.
Thank you.
So that included hearings and things like that, because I remember counting them at one point.
Okay, I thought you were talking about information sessions.
Well, I think he was, but I was just, those were open and lots of people came to those meetings.
There were at least a half a dozen AdCom water subcommittee meetings.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were coffees, we were going door to door, holding coffees, sending mailers, the other,
Right.
And the other, Eversource was as well.
Well,
is there a mic drop icon? Because I made.
Well, are you saying, Evan, that the Board of Selectmen should right now be having coffees and informational meetings about an override when they haven't figured out, the budget has not been completely figured out and there are variables out there still that we don't know?
Yes, I am, Julie.
It wasn't the Board of Selectmen, though. It was we were friends of the.
Can do that.
We were friends of the water company. We're a separate entity.
Oh,
we
I don't
did
think
the
we should
middle
go down the
school, we were
path
the
whether there
friends.
was Board of Selectmen advocacy for the water company. That's a slippery slope.
I hate to stand between people getting to approval of the minutes. But I will observe, however, that there have been multiple Board of Selectmen meetings that have addressed finances. We have certainly had multiple discussions ourselves. The school committee, finance committee has had multiple open meetings.
Right.
The AdCom, ACES has had multiple open meetings. So there's certainly been plenty of opportunity for the public to be involved. a more broad-based information session, I think, is probably in order once some decisions have been made of the direction we're going in. So, are we good at this point?
Bob, I had my hand up. I was just
Let me-
going to say one thing to that too, which is until a budget was submitted by the school committee and we went through this budget cycle and saw where they all landed, which was in this position of a huge deficit, we weren't in a position to move forward. So, I mean, timeline is very different in this situation than it was with the water company. Anyway,
Absolutely.
I hope we're moving on.
Good.
Minutes.
I do note that we've had a member of the public join us. Mr. Corbett, welcome. Thank you for your letter the other day. It's been distributed to the entire EdCom. I don't know. It was incumbent upon me to invite comments from members of the public. Is there anything you would like to comment on at this point?
No, I don't have any comments. I just came to observe and listen tonight.
Okay, thank you. So we come to approval of the minutes of the February 25th meeting. They've been distributed by George to everybody. Does anyone have any further comments or proposed suggestions or revisions? Has everybody had a chance to look them over?
I devoured them.
We knew that. You didn't have to say that.
Yep.
If there are none, I would accept the motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Yep.
George,
Second. Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Alan.
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Eveline,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
Andy McElhaney,
Aye.
Erin Kelly.
Aye.
Okay. Now, I had hoped to have Tom Mayo here to talk about the town administrator budget recommendations. I distributed them all to all of his slides to everyone. I think they're relatively self-apparent. I did have one question on the legal slide as to whether it included the water company acquisition costs. I know we talked about that the other day, Sue. I don't know if you have an answer to that or not.
Actually, Michelle did email us late this afternoon, and yes, it did. And it was going to go down to, I believe, 138,000.
So the recommendation was going to move downwards.
Yeah, it's going to drop to 138K for legal, the additional request.
Okay.
What
Bob,
slide
did
is,
you email something today? I'm not sure I received it.
The town administrator's slides, I think I sent them out yesterday.
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Let me look. Thanks.
As of 16 minutes ago, they were on their, the last article on the Board of Selectmen's meeting.
Okay. Well, why don't we move on and hopefully Tom and Michelle can join us. In terms of warrant articles updates, I think it's pretty much status quo where we were Tuesday night. Still waiting on climate action. Citizens petitions yet to be determined. I understand the report of the Personnel Board is probably not going to be ready for 10 days or 2 weeks. So we have a number of things that we're waiting on before we can finally determine our recommended motions on those articles. I don't know if anybody else has a warrant article update. Are there any liaison reports?
Brenda and
Yes,
Aaron have their hands up.
Aaron and then Brenda.
Hi, I just wanted to mention, I just got off the Board of Selectmen where they talked about the HMLP article, and they are going to continue their conversation. They have yet to set a specific date for that. Some of the conversation, in addition to addressing some of abutters' concerns, was surrounding changing the scope of the article down, and whether or not that would be an effective option moving forward. So the powers that be, we're going to meet tomorrow to discuss that. And so I guess we are continuing to continue that article.
Okay, great. Thanks for that good news. Brenda.
My question, Brad Moyer from the Climate Action Task Force wanted to know if there was a date that AdCom would want to hear. He might be able to use that as pressure to get Hingham Light Plant to commit to what funding they will offer. So is there a date next week or some week coming that you?
Well, we could put them on for
Push.
either Tuesday or Thursday next week.
Okay. All right.
You want the earlier date?
I will, how about if I get back to Brad and say to aim for either Tuesday or Thursday and let us know which one he can get an answer by.
Okay, well, I have to post for Tuesday by tomorrow.
Okay, so probably Thursday then.
So if you can get back to me before noontime tomorrow and let me know if Tuesday is okay.
I don't think you'll get an answer back that quickly, so.
All right, well, then I'll put it on for Thursday.
Thank you.
Or if I hear from you in the meantime, you know, we can still put it on for Tuesday as long as I get enough leadway. Okay, any other liaison reports? Julie?
The Bear Cove Park Committee is meeting next week, and they're going to discuss whether they will try to pull the bathroom project as a result of the vote for no action. So I'll keep you posted.
Okay.
Tell them not to, that the minority will make a strong pitch on behalf of the poor elderly people using Bear Cove Park.
I told
who don't want to venture into the woods, fall down, can't get up, die from exposure, all because the town didn't want to construct a.
Andy, if your strategy is to get up and call everybody nabobs, negative nabobs.
Negative nabobs of negativism. Obstructionist.
So maybe that strategy will work if you get up and yell at everybody.
And the conclusion of your story, Andy, would be devoured by unleashed dogs.
Well, I was going to say that you know, when you're talking about public bathrooms to the seniors, I mean, everybody would say, I'll vote for public bathrooms always and everywhere. And don't tell me you're going to pull the funding so that you're telling me I have to wait.
And are you going to explain that Hingham is too fancy to have a porta potty?
When was the last time you told your mother to use a porta potty during a pandemic and her legs were not strong enough to support her without sitting down?
You know, the public bathroom would be closed during a pandemic too, Andy, just so you know.
No, it would be open
I
now.
hope Brian McGrory isn't listening to this. Getting on to housekeeping. It looks like we'll probably need to have meetings next week on Tuesday and Thursday. You know, we've already got one agenda item for Thursday. The policies and procedures review, can we put that on next week?
For Tuesday, I think we talked about Tuesday.
Okay. And nothing has happened with the town meeting or related deadlines. They've all remained the same. Are there any matters not anticipated within 48 hours?
Can we adjourn?
Well, if Tom Mayo can join us.
We can put him on for Tuesday if not, I guess we could.
Do you know where they are in their meeting, Sue?
I just texted Michelle. Give me 1 second.
I don't have that email from Bob with other slides or something from Bob.
I just emailed it to you, Libby.
Oh, thanks, Sue. Got it. Thank you.
She must be talking because she hasn't responded.
Well, I hate to keep us all sitting here. We could ask Tom to come see us next week.
Right.
That'd be good.
So why, I would,
I move to adjourn.
is there,
Second.
Thank you, Andy.
Aaron,
To do it before you leave.
George,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Dave.
Aye.
What did I do? Victor,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
Kevin,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Daveline,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
and Andy.
Aye.